The late afternoon sun slanted through the branches of the old oak tree, casting shimmering, dancing patterns on the surface of the water. For Ethan Hayes, this was the golden hour, the only part of the day that felt whole anymore. He sat on the edge of the in-ground pool, his feet submerged in the heated water, and watched his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, glide through the turquoise expanse. She wasn't swimming so much as floating, her small body supported by the gentle buoyancy, a look of serene focus on her face. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each extension of her arms and legs a small victory. Here in the water, she was weightless. Here, she was free from the constant grinding pain that defined her life on land. "Look, Daddy," she called, her voice bright and clear, a sound that sliced through the ever-present fog of his sorrow. She pushed off the side and kicked her legs in a clumsy but determined flutter kick. "I'm a mermaid." Ethan smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You're the most beautiful mermaid in the whole world, Sweet Pea." The pool wasn't a luxury, it was a lifeline. When the diagnosis had come down, a rare and aggressive form of juvenile idiopathic arthritis, the doctors had been blunt. Medication would manage, but the real therapy, the only thing that would maintain her mobility and mitigate the relentless pain, was daily hydrotherapy in warm, salinized water. His late wife Sarah had designed it. In the last few months of her own battle, as cancer stole her strength but never her spirit, she had sketched it out on graph paper at the kitchen table. It was her final project, her gift to the daughter she knew she was leaving behind. A sanctuary built with love to be filled with healing. Ethan had poured every last cent of her life insurance into making it a reality, digging the hole himself on weekends, his grief and sweat mingling with the turned earth. The pool was barely 3 months old. The laughter was just starting to feel normal again. That's when he saw it. Tucked into the handle of the sliding glass door leading to the patio was a crisp, white envelope, official-looking. He didn't remember the mail carrier coming to the back door. With a knot of unease tightening in his stomach, he stood drying his feet on the stone pavers and walked over to retrieve it. The logo of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association was embossed in the top left corner. He tore it open, his thumb catching on the sharp edge. A single drop of blood welled, staining the paper as he unfolded the letter. His eyes scanned the cold, impersonal type. In violation of Bylaw 7, Section 4A, regarding unapproved permanent structures. Failure to obtain prior written consent from the Architectural Review Committee. This letter serves as a formal notice. You have 30 days from the date of this letter to rectify the violation. Rectification requires the complete removal and dismantling of the unapproved structure, in-ground swimming pool, and restoration of the property to its original state. The words blurred. A roaring sound filled his ears, drowning out Lily's happy splashing. Complete removal. Demolish. It felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind from his lungs. They couldn't be serious. This was a mistake. A bureaucratic oversight. He had submitted the plans, hadn't he? He searched his memory, a frantic scramble through the chaotic months after Sarah's death. Maybe he'd forgotten the form. Maybe it got lost in the mail. It had to be a mistake. He looked from the letter to the pool, where Lily was now trying to do a handstand in the shallow end, her giggles echoing in the quiet air. He saw Sarah's blueprints in his mind, the careful notes in her elegant script, the little heart she'd drawn in the corner. Demolish her last gift? Take away his daughter's only relief? A cold, hard fury began to replace the shock. It started in his gut and spread through his veins like ice. His first call was to Carol Perkins, the HOA president. She lived 3 houses down, in a beige colonial with an unnervingly perfect lawn and an American flag that was always lit just so after dusk. "Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of syrupy condescension she reserved for people she considered beneath her. "I was wondering when you'd call." "Carol, there's been a mistake," Ethan began, trying to keep his voice level. "I got a letter about my pool. It's a therapy pool for my daughter, Lily. She has severe arthritis. Her doctors prescribed it." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the faint rustle of paper. "I have the file right here, Ethan. There's no mistake. The bylaws are perfectly clear. Any permanent structural addition requires a 60-day review period and a majority approval from the ARC. You began excavation a week after submitting your paperwork. You broke ground without approval. We were going through a lot, he stammered, hating the weakness in his own voice. My wife had just passed. My daughter was in constant pain. I thought it was a formality. I can provide all the medical documentation, letters from her rheumatologist, her physical therapist. I'm sorry for your loss, Ethan. I truly am, she said, with an inflection that suggested she was anything but. But personal circumstances do not grant an exemption from the community covenants. The rules are in place to protect property values for everyone. An unapproved pool, especially one so visible, sets a dangerous precedent. A dangerous precedent, he repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. It's a swimming pool, Carol, not a meth lab. It's keeping my little girl out of a wheelchair. Your tone is not appreciated, she snapped, the saccharine veneer vanishing. The fact is, multiple neighbors have lodged formal complaints. The noise, the unsightly construction equipment you had for weeks, the potential liability. This is a community, Ethan, not your own private kingdom. The letter stands. You have 30 days. And if I don't? The question was quiet, laced with something that made the air feel heavy. Then the association will place a lien on your property and begin legal proceedings to enforce the covenant, including fines of $200 per day, retroactive to the date of the violation. I assure you, it will be much cheaper to just hire a bulldozer. The line went dead. Ethan stood there, phone in hand, shaking with a rage so profound it made him dizzy. He looked at his daughter, so happy in the water, and felt a primal, protective instinct surge through him. This wasn't about bylaws or property values. This was about power. Carol Perkins, a woman whose greatest joy in life was measuring the height of her neighbor's grass with a ruler, had decided to make an example of him. Over the next 2 weeks, he tried every rational approach. He emailed the entire HOA board, attaching scans of Lily's medical records, a detailed letter from her doctor at Johns Hopkins, and an impassioned plea explaining the situation. He received a single 2-sentence reply from the board secretary, Gerald, a mousy man who was little more than Carol's shadow. The board has received your correspondence. Our position remains unchanged. He tried talking to his neighbors. Some were sympathetic, offering hushed words of support in their driveways, but their eyes would dart nervously toward Carol's house. Others looked away, refusing to meet his gaze. He learned that Carol had canvassed the neighborhood, spinning a story about a reckless, rule-breaking widower who was lowering property values and creating a safety hazard that would raise everyone's insurance premiums. She had turned his private pain into a public nuisance. The 30 days dwindled. The leaves on the oak tree began to turn from green to gold. The temperature dropped, but the pool's heater kept the water a constant, soothing 92 degrees. Every day, Lily asked him, her brow furrowed with a worry no 7-year-old should carry. Is Mrs. Perkins going to break our pool, Daddy? And every day he'd hug her tight and say, Never, sweet pea. I will never let that happen. It was a promise to her, and a vow to himself. He printed out copies of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act, highlighting sections on reasonable accommodations for medical necessity. He prepared a speech. He was a quiet man by nature, a software engineer who preferred the clean logic of code to the messy chaos of human conflict. But Sarah had been the fighter, the fierce advocate. He felt her spirit stirring in him now, demanding he protect their daughter. The night of the HOA meeting was cold and damp. Ethan tucked Lily into bed, reading her an extra chapter of her favorite book before kissing her forehead. He looked down at her sleeping face, her features so much like her mother's, and felt his resolve harden into something unbreakable. He walked to the community clubhouse, a sterile, soulless building at the entrance to the subdivision. Inside, about 30 residents were scattered in metal folding chairs facing a long table at the front. Carol Perkins sat in the center, flanked by Gerald and the other 3 board members. She wore a tailored navy blue blazer and a look of supreme authority. She called the meeting to order, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. They droned on for nearly an hour about landscaping contracts, holiday decoration guidelines, and a proposed change to the approved shade of beige for exterior trim. Ethan sat silently, his hands clenched into fists in his lap, a thick manila folder of his documents resting on his knees. The tension inside him was a living thing, a coiled snake waiting to strike. Finally, Carol looked at her agenda and said, "The final item for this evening is the Bylaw 7 violation at 114 Maple Drive." She didn't use his name, just his address, as if the house itself were the offender. "Mr. Hayes, you've requested to address the board. You have 5 minutes." The word hung in the air, a line drawn in the sand. Don't touch me. Bill, the contractor, was a man accustomed to physical assertion. He saw Ethan's defiance not as a warning from a grieving father pushed to his limit, but as a challenge from a smaller man. A smirk ghosted across his thick lips. Instead of removing his hand, he tightened his grip, his fingers digging into Ethan's shoulder like claws. "You're gonna learn some respect." "Pal," he grunted, shoving Ethan backward. The shove was hard, knocking Ethan off balance. He stumbled back, his heel catching on the leg of a metal folding chair. He flailed, pinwheeling his arms, and crashed into the flimsy table holding a large water cooler and a stack of paper cups. The cooler tipped, a 5-gallon jug of water landing on the linoleum floor with a deafening crack boom that sounded like a gunshot. Water exploded across the floor. That was the spark. The room erupted. Adrenaline, raw and undiluted, surged through Ethan's veins. He didn't think. He reacted. As Bill lunged forward, Ethan, still tangled in the chair, shoved it with his legs directly into the contractor's shins. Bill roared in pain and surprise, stumbling forward. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his mind a white-hot blank of pure rage. He saw Carol's face, her mouth a perfect O of shock that was quickly twisting into a mask of vindictive pleasure. He saw Gerald fumbling with his phone, trying to dial 911. From the other side of the room, a man yelled, "Hey, leave him alone!" It was Tom, a quiet neighbor from the end of the cul-de-sac whose kids sometimes played with Lily. He started moving toward them. Bill, recovering his balance, ignored Tom completely and swung a clumsy, powerful fist at Ethan's head. Ethan ducked instinctively, the punch sailing over his shoulder. He countered with a wild, desperate punch of his own. He was a coder, not a brawler. His fist connected not with Bill's jaw, but with his thick neck. It had no effect. Bill grabbed the front of Ethan's shirt, pulling him forward and driving a knee into his stomach. The air left Ethan's body in a painful whoosh. He gasped, doubling over, but his fury wouldn't let him fall. He grabbed a fistful of Bill's polo shirt and heaved, using the bigger man's momentum to send them both careening sideways. They slammed into the front row of chairs, scattering them like bowling pins. People screamed and scrambled to get away. Tom reached them and tried to pull Bill off Ethan. "Break it up! For God's sake, Bill! He's half your size!" Bill, enraged, turned and threw a backhand elbow, catching Tom on the side of the head. Tom staggered back, stunned. Now it was chaos. A few other men, friends of Bill's from their weekend barbecues, surged forward. One of them grabbed Tom. Another tried to get a hold of Ethan. Someone's wife was shrieking. A continuous, piercing sound that cut through the grunts and curses. Ethan was on the floor, wrestling with Bill, the smell of cheap cologne and sweat filling his nostrils. He felt a fist connect with his cheekbone, a burst of bright white light behind his eyes. He tasted blood. Through the haze of pain, he saw Carol Perkins standing by the main table, untouched by the melee. She wasn't trying to stop it. She was watching, her expression one of cold, calculated vindication. This was what she wanted. Proof. She had goaded him, insulted his dead wife, and now she had her proof that he was the unhinged, dangerous man she'd made him out to be. The realization sent another jolt of adrenaline through him. He fought back with the ferocity of a cornered animal, kicking and shoving. He managed to get a hand free and pushed with all his might against Bill's throat. The contractor gagged, his grip loosening for a second. It was enough. Ethan scrambled away, crawling over an overturned chair, trying to get to his feet. That's when the sirens started, faint at first. Then rapidly growing louder, the piercing wail cut through the noise of the brawl. The effect was instantaneous. The fighting stopped. The men disentangled, breathing heavily, their faces flushed. The screaming woman finally choked back a sob. Everyone froze, looking toward the door like guilty children. 2 police officers entered the room, their expressions grim and professional. The sight of their uniforms and the heavy black equipment on their belts sucked all the fight out of the space. "Everybody stay where you are," the older officer commanded, his voice a no-nonsense baritone that demanded obedience. His eyes swept over the scene, the wrecked chairs, the puddled water, the disheveled men, Ethan dabbing at his bleeding lip with the back of his hand. Carol Perkins immediately stepped forward, transforming in an instant from a cold observer to a distraught victim. "Oh, thank God you're here, officer," she cried, pointing a trembling finger at Ethan. "That man, he just went crazy. He attacked us. He assaulted Mr. Johnson here and started destroying the room." Bill, clutching his shin where the chair had hit him, chimed in, his voice thick with outrage. "He came at me. I was just trying to calm him down and he flew off the handle. Punched me right in the throat." The officers exchanged a look. The younger one approached Ethan, his hand resting near his sidearm. "Sir, I need you to come over here with me. Keep your hands where I can see them." Ethan felt a surreal sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie. His ears were ringing. His cheek was throbbing. He looked at the faces of his neighbors. Some wouldn't meet his eyes. Others, the ones in Carol's camp, glared at him with open hostility. And in the back, near the door, he saw a teenager, probably the son of one of the residents, holding his smartphone up, the small red light indicating it was recording everything. "That's not what happened," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. She insulted my wife." He put his hands on me. "He shoved me first." "He's lying," Carol declared. "He was making threats." The entire room heard him. "Ask anyone." The older officer began taking statements, and the narrative was set in stone. Carol, Bill, and 2 of Bill's friends all told the same story. Ethan Hayes, upset about a bylaw violation, had become threatening and then violent, initiating the physical altercation. Tom tried to provide a different account, but he was flustered and his version was quickly shouted down by the others. Ethan's own words felt weak, pathetic. Explaining the emotional context, the insult to his dead wife, sounded like a flimsy excuse in the face of Bill's bruised neck and the chaos of the room. The officer listening to him just nodded, his face impassive. "Okay, sir, I understand. But right now I have multiple witnesses and a clear aggressor. Turn around for me, please." The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists was the loudest sound he had ever heard. It was a sound of finality, a sound of utter catastrophic failure. He hadn't just lost the argument. He had lost his dignity, his standing in the community, and quite possibly his freedom. As they led him out of the clubhouse and into the flashing blue and red lights of the patrol car, he saw Carol Perkins through the window. She was standing with a small group of her supporters, her arms crossed. Her face, illuminated by the strobing lights, was a mask of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had won. He was processed at the local precinct and charged with misdemeanor assault and battery. He was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and despair. He sat on the cold metal bench, his throbbing cheek a constant reminder of his failure. All he could think about was Lily, sleeping peacefully in her bed, unaware that her father was in a jail cell, arrested for a brawl at an HOA meeting. He had promised to protect her, and instead, he had jeopardized everything. Hours later, he was released on his own recognizance, with a court date set for the following month. The drive home was a blur. The streets of his perfect suburban neighborhood looked alien and hostile. When he finally walked through his own front door, the silence of the house was suffocating. He crept into Lily's room and watched her sleep, the moonlight tracing her delicate features. A small purple bruise was beginning to form on his cheek. He had to make sure she didn't see it in the morning. He felt like a monster. Unable to sleep, he went downstairs and turned on the television, flipping to the local 11 o'clock news. And there it was. "Chaos at a suburban HOA meeting tonight," the news anchor began, her expression serious. A dispute over a backyard swimming pool allegedly boiled over into a full-scale brawl. Then the footage filled the screen. Shaky, pixelated video from the teenager's phone. It was horrifying. It showed the moment he shoved the chair, the wild swing he took at Bill, the tangle of bodies on the floor. It was edited, of course, cutting out the initial shove from Bill, the verbal provocation from Carol. It just showed his rage, raw and ugly. They showed his mugshot, Ethan Hayes, 42. His face, tired and bruised under the harsh precinct lighting, stared back at him from the screen. He was the villain. The story was set. He clicked off the TV and buried his face in his hands. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on him, crushing him. He had played right into Carol's hands. She hadn't just won. She had annihilated him. He was a pariah, a criminal. The lien would come next. Then the lawyers. He had no fight left. She had taken everything. A soft knock echoed from his front door. Ethan froze. Who could possibly be at his door at this hour? A police officer with more questions? A reporter camped out on his lawn? He thought about ignoring it, but the knock came again, gentle but insistent. With a heavy heart, he pulled himself up and walked to the door, peering through the peephole. He was shocked to see Margaret, the elderly widow. The world, which had been a chaotic, roaring mess of shame and fury, snapped into sharp, silent focus. Ethan stared at the tablet in Margaret's hands. The video played on a loop. Bill's aggressive shove, the crash of the cooler, Carol's cold, triumphant expression. It was the truth. A clear, undeniable, and portable version of the truth. Despair didn't vanish, but it was instantly crowded out by something new. Not the hot, blinding rage of the meeting, but a cold, dense, and heavy determination. It settled deep in his bones, an anchor in the storm. "Can you send me that?" he asked, his voice steady for the first time in what felt like days. "I already have, dear," Margaret said with a small, knowing smile. "Check your email. I also took the liberty of looking someone up for you. She's not cheap, but from what I hear, she's a shark, and you, my boy, are swimming in infested waters." The next morning, Ethan sat in the sleek minimalist office of Jessica Riley, attorney at law. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing and an aura of restless energy. She had watched Margaret's video 3 times in silence, her expression unreadable before setting the tablet down on her glass desk. "Well, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice crisp. "Congratulations! You've brought a bazooka to a knife fight." Ethan felt a flicker of relief. "So it's good?" "Good doesn't begin to cover it," Jessica replied, leaning forward. "This video does 2 things. First, it likely gets your criminal charge dismissed. I'll be on the phone with the DA's office this afternoon. In fact, it gives us grounds to file charges against William Johnson for assault. We'll be doing that as well. We don't react, Ethan. We dictate." The force of her confidence was a balm to his frayed nerves. "Okay, what's the second thing?" "The second thing is leverage. Your fight isn't just about the assault charge. It's about your home, your daughter, and this pool. That's a civil matter. The HOA, represented by the imperious Carol Perkins, is going to argue you violated the covenants. They will use the brawl, their version of it, to paint you as an unstable and undesirable resident to a judge. They will try to bury you in fines and legal fees until you either lose your house or fill that hole in your backyard with dirt." Jessica steepled her fingers. "This video kneecaps their entire narrative. It doesn't just show you were provoked. It shows the HOA president passively watching as you were assaulted at an official meeting she was chairing. It shows a clear bias and a hostile environment. This is no longer about a simple bylaw violation. This is about harassment." For the first time, Ethan felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, not from instability, but from a seismic change in power. "What do we do?" he asked. "We fight on 2 fronts," she said, her eyes gleaming. "On the criminal front, we clear your name and hold Bill Johnson accountable. On the civil front, we file a countersuit against the HOA. We'll seek a legal injunction to halt the fines and any action against your property. We will argue that the pool is a medically necessary accommodation under the Fair Housing Act and that the HOA's refusal is a discriminatory practice. And we will add a claim for damages based on the harassment and bad faith conduct of the board. Using this video and Ms. Perkins's deplorable comments about your late wife as Exhibit A." She paused, letting the strategy sink in. "But I need more than the video. A single incident can be dismissed as an anomaly. We need to establish a pattern. Has Carol Perkins done this before? Has she used the bylaws to target other residents she doesn't like? I need you to find out. Armed with a mission, Ethan's world was no longer confined to the four walls of his house. Guided by Margaret, who seemed to know the history of every cracked driveway and unapproved garden gnome in Willow Creek Estates, he began to talk to his neighbors. Not as the wild-eyed man from the news, but as a quiet father with a folder full of documents and a video on his phone. The first few conversations were hesitant. People were afraid. But when Ethan showed them Margaret's video, their expressions changed. They saw the lie they had been told and the truth of what had occurred. And then, the stories started to trickle out. The Patels, a young couple at the end of the street, told him how Carol had forced them to tear out a 50-square-foot vegetable garden because it wasn't aesthetically harmonious, fining them daily until the last tomato plant was gone. Mr. Henderson, a retired Army vet, had been cited for his flagpole being 6 inches too tall. The Lees were in a months-long battle over the color of their daughter's swing set, which Carol had deemed a visually jarring shade of primary red. Each story on its own was a petty grievance, but together, woven into a tapestry of arbitrary and vindictive enforcement, they became a powerful weapon. Ethan documented every story, got sworn affidavits, and fed everything to Jessica Riley. His quiet grief was slowly being forged into cold, methodical purpose. Meanwhile, Carol Perkins and the HOA were not idle. A thick packet arrived via certified mail from the association's high-powered law firm. It was a formal notice that the daily fines of $200 were now in effect, backdated to the day after the original 30-day notice expired. It included a bill for over $4,000. It also contained a cease and desist letter, accusing him of engaging in a defamatory campaign of harassment against the board members and warning him of further legal action. Carol had overplayed her hand. The letter, intended to intimidate, instead galvanized the quiet opposition. When the Patels heard about the backdated fines, they gave Ethan a copy of their own lengthy, threatening correspondence from the HOA's lawyers. Tom, the neighbor who had tried to help, organized a small meeting in his garage with a half-dozen other families. "This isn't about a pool anymore," Tom said, his face grim as the neighbors huddled among his lawn equipment and tool chests. "It's about her. If she can do this to Ethan, she can do it to any of us. My kids love playing with Lily. I can't stand by and watch that woman try to ruin his life over this." The rebellion was starting. The Whisper Network had found its voice. The first domino fell a week later. Jessica Riley called Ethan, her voice crackling with satisfaction. "I just got off the phone with Assistant District Attorney Miller," she said. "I sent him Margaret's video yesterday. He called it unequivocal. The charges against you are being dropped." "Effective immediately." Ethan sank into a kitchen chair, the phone pressed hard against his ear. The relief was so overwhelming it felt like a physical weight being lifted from his chest. He was no longer a criminal. "There's more," Jessica continued, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "The DA's office has reviewed the footage and the initial police report. They are officially filing assault and battery charges against William Johnson. He'll be served by the end of the day." That evening, as the sun set, casting its golden light on the pool where Lily was finishing her therapy, Ethan saw it. A sheriff's deputy's car pulled up in front of Bill Johnson's house. Bill came to the door, his usual bravado gone, his face a mask of disbelief as the deputy handed him an official-looking document. He looked across the street and his eyes met Ethan's. There was no anger in his gaze now, only a dawning, horrified understanding. He had backed the wrong person. He had been a pawn in Carol's game, and now he was paying the price. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Ethan Hayes' charges were dropped. Bill Johnson, Carol's enforcer, was being charged with assault. The video was real. Carol's story was a lie. It was more than a legal victory. It was a moral one. It shattered Carol's carefully constructed narrative and exposed her for what she was. The fear she had wielded for so long was beginning to crumble, replaced by a rising tide of resentment. Later that night, Ethan's phone rang. It was Tom. "Ethan," he said, his voice charged with a new energy. A few of us have been talking since we heard about Bill. What happened to you? It was the last straw. We're sick of living in fear of a citation because our recycling bin is out for too long. Ethan listened, his heart pounding. There's a provision in the HOA charter, Tom continued, for a special meeting to recall the board. It requires a petition signed by 25% of the homeowners. We've already got more than half the signatures we need just from tonight. People are finally ready to fight back. There was a pause, and then he said the words that changed everything. We're doing this, Ethan, and we want you to lead it. The question hung in the silence of the garage, heavier than the smell of gasoline and cut grass. We want you to lead it. Ethan looked at the faces of his neighbors, Tom, the Patels, a half-dozen others, illuminated by a single bare bulb. He saw their hope, their frustration, their trust. A week ago, he was a pariah. Now they were asking him to be their champion. The quiet, grieving software engineer who just wanted to be left alone was being asked to lead a rebellion. His first instinct was to say no. It wasn't who he was. He preferred the clean, binary logic of code to the messy, emotional calculus of people. But then he thought of Lily sleeping at home, of Sarah's blueprints, and of Carol Perkins's smug, triumphant face as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. He realized this was no longer a choice. Carol had forced this war upon him, and the only way to protect his family was to see it through to the end. Okay, Ethan said, the single word sealing his fate. I'll do it. The campaign, if it could be called that, began the next day. Their headquarters was Margaret's dining room table, which was soon buried under neighborhood plat maps, copies of the HOA charter, and stacks of petition forms. Jessica Riley joined their first strategy session via video call, her sharp, focused face on a laptop screen. Carol and her board are not going to take this lying down, Jessica warned them. They will use the HOA's resources against you. They'll hire lawyers. They'll use the official newsletter for propaganda. You have to be prepared, and you have to be flawless. Every signature must be valid. Every step of the recall process followed to the letter. Ethan's role as a leader felt unnatural at first. He was used to solving problems with algorithms, not conversations. But as he went door to door with Tom and Margaret, something shifted. He wasn't just collecting signatures. He was listening. He listened to a young mother, close to tears, describe the violation notice she received because her toddler's plastic slide was visible from the street. He listened to an elderly man talk about the lien placed on his home over a dispute about the type of mulch in his flower beds. He realized they were all fighting the same battle, just on different fronts. His pool wasn't an isolated incident. It was merely the loudest example of a tyranny of pettiness that had been suffocating the community for years. With every story he heard, his voice grew stronger, his resolve harder. He wasn't just fighting for Lily anymore. He was fighting for the Patel's garden, for the Lee's swing set, for Mr. Henderson's flagpole. As Jessica had predicted, Carol's counterattack was swift and vicious. An official president's letter was emailed to every resident. It painted Ethan as a disgruntled, violent criminal who was leading a radical campaign of misinformation to dismantle the very rules that protected their property values. It accused his supporters of wanting to turn Willow Creek Estates into an anarchic free-for-all where any violation would go unpunished. The letter was filled with loaded phrases like community, integrity, and protecting our investment, designed to stoke fear in the residents who were on the fence. Then the targeted harassment began. Margaret received a notice for improperly stored gardening tools. Tom was cited for a barely visible crack in his driveway. It was a transparent, desperate attempt to intimidate them into silence. It had the opposite effect. For every bogus citation Carol issued, 2 more households signed the recall petition in defiance. Carol's final gambit was legal. Her lawyer sent Jessica a letter claiming the petition was invalid due to a technicality in a rarely cited bylaw. Jessica dispatched it with a blistering 3-page legal response that not only refuted their claim, but also put them on notice for tortious interference and witness intimidation. The legal challenge evaporated. One evening, after a long day of canvassing, Ethan was sitting by the pool with Lily. The water glowed under the soft underwater lights. "A beacon of tranquility in the midst of the chaos. Are you and Mrs. Perkins in a big fight?" Lily asked, her small voice cutting through his thoughts. She had seen one of Carol's flyers that someone had left on their doorstep, the one with his mugshot crudely photoshopped onto it. He pulled her close. "Yes, sweet pea. We are." "Are you going to have to go to jail again?" she whispered, her fear a palpable thing. Ethan's heart ached. He tilted her chin up so she could see the absolute certainty in his eyes. "No, never again." "Do you know what I'm doing, Lily? I'm fighting to make sure no one in our neighborhood is ever unfairly bullied again. I'm fighting for people who are afraid to fight for themselves. Your mom, she was always the bravest person I knew. She always stood up for what was right. I'm just trying to be a little more like her." Lily laid her head on his shoulder. "Mommy would be proud of you, Daddy." In that moment, all the exhaustion and fear fell away, replaced by a profound and unshakable sense of purpose. The night of the special recall meeting, the community clubhouse was unrecognizable. Every chair was filled, with residents standing 3 deep along the walls and spilling out into the foyer. The air was thick with anticipation, a charged silence that felt more like a courtroom than a community center. A neutral moderator, a lawyer hired for the occasion, stood at the podium. Carol and the other 4 board members sat at the long table, looking grim. Carol, in her signature navy blazer, projected an air of icy defiance, but Ethan could see the subtle tremor in her hands. The moderator explained the rules. The petition was officially certified. The board would be given a chance to speak, followed by the leader of the petition, Mr. Hayes. Then they would vote by secret paper ballot. Carol rose and walked to the podium. She didn't plead. She scolded. She spoke of her 10 years of tireless service and the thankless task of upholding the standards of the community. She painted a dystopian picture of Willow Creek without her leadership, of falling property values, unkempt lawns, and chaos. She looked directly at Ethan. "Do not be swayed by one man's emotional narrative," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Do not let him dismantle a decade of hard work because he believes the rules should not apply to him. A vote for this recall is a vote for anarchy." She sat down to a sparse, scattered applause from her few remaining loyalists. The room waited. Ethan walked to the podium. He carried no notes. He looked out at the faces of his neighbors, friends, and adversaries. He was no longer the nervous, pleading man who had stood here weeks ago. "My name is Ethan Hayes," he began, his voice calm and clear, reaching every corner of the room. "And Mrs. Perkins is right about one thing. This isn't just about my pool." He looked at the Patels. "This is about being able to grow vegetables, to feed your family without being fined." He looked at the Lees. "It's about your daughter being able to play on a red swing set because it's her favorite color." He looked at Mr. Henderson. "It's about being able to fly a flag for the country you served without being harassed." "A community isn't a set of covenants," he continued, his voice rising with quiet passion. "It's a collection of people. It's supposed to be about supporting each other, especially when we're struggling. It's about compassion. It's about empathy. For 10 years, the bylaws of this community have not been used as a guide. They have been used as a weapon, and tonight we have a choice. We can continue to live in a place where we are afraid of our neighbors, or we can choose to be a community again." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room one last time. "My wife designed our pool so our daughter could have a moment of peace from her pain. That's all it ever was. It was an act of love. I don't believe that love or compassion or kindness should ever be a violation. Your vote tonight isn't for or against me. It's a vote for the kind of place we all want to call home." He walked back to his seat amidst a profound silence, which was then broken by a wave of thunderous, sustained applause that shook the room. The voting was tense. Ballots were collected in a clear plastic box. The moderator and a representative from each side, Tom for Ethan's group, Gerald for the board, counted them on a table in front of everyone. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He could feel Lily's future, his family's peace, hanging in the balance. After what felt like an eternity, the moderator returned to the podium, a sheet of paper in his hand. The results of the vote on the motion to recall the entire 5-member board of directors are as follows, he announced, his voice echoing in the dead silent room. He cleared his throat. In favor of the recall, 142. Opposed to the recall, 19. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by an explosion of cheers, whistles, and applause. It was a landslide, an utter, undeniable repudiation. Ethan felt a dizzying wave of relief. He looked over at the board's table. The other members looked stunned, defeated. But Carol Perkins's face was a horrifying mask of pure, undiluted fury. Her carefully constructed empire had crumbled to dust around her in a single night. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. With a sharp, jerky movement, she gathered her purse and her leather-bound notebook. She stood, her back ramrod straight, and without looking at anyone, she turned and strode toward the exit. The crowd parted for her as if she were poison. As she reached the door, she stopped for a single, chilling moment and looked back, her eyes locking with Ethan's. It was a look of such profound hatred that it made his blood run cold. It wasn't the look of a defeated opponent. It was the look of someone vowing revenge. The cheer that erupted in the clubhouse was more than a sound of victory. It was a collective exhale, a release of pressure that had been building in the community for a decade. Neighbors were hugging, shaking hands, and clapping Ethan on the back. The oppressive reign of Carol Perkins was over. In the euphoric aftermath, as a small group gathered around the table to officially sign the recall documents, Tom clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Well, Mr. President," he said with a wide grin, "your first order of business?" Ethan looked at the hopeful faces around him and held up a hand. "Thank you, everyone, for your trust, for your courage. But I'm not the next president." A wave of disappointment rippled through the group, and he quickly clarified. "My fight was for my family and for a principle. I never wanted power. I just wanted peace. I'll gladly serve on an interim board to help get us back on our feet. But this community needs a leader who wants the job, not one who was forced into it." His eyes fell on Margaret, who was watching with quiet pride. "It needs someone with wisdom, history, and the respect of everyone here." A murmur of agreement went through the group. The transition had begun. The first meeting of the interim Willow Creek Board was held 2 days later, not in the sterile clubhouse, but on Tom's back patio. With burgers on the grill and kids playing in the yard, the atmosphere was one of collaboration, not decree. With Ethan's quiet guidance, they passed 3 motions in under 15 minutes. The first was a unanimous vote to grant a full, retroactive, and permanent variance for the therapy pool at 114 Maple Drive. The second was to void and forgive all fines levied against Ethan Hayes. The third, proposed by Ethan himself, was to form a covenant review committee to audit the last 5 years of violations, with the express purpose of identifying and reversing any fines or actions deemed to be arbitrary, petty, or retaliatory. A wave of healing had begun to wash over the entire community. Life for Ethan and Lily started to find a new, calmer rhythm. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of security he hadn't felt since before Sarah got sick. His neighbors no longer averted their eyes. They waved. They stopped to chat. They asked after Lily. The story of the brawl and the recall had become a local legend, a cautionary tale of what happens when rules eclipse reason. Bill Johnson, humiliated and facing his own legal troubles, put his house up for sale. But Ethan couldn't shake the memory of Carol's final look. It was the look of a queen dethroned, and he knew that her silence was not the same as surrender. The blow came a month later, on a peaceful Tuesday morning. It came in the form of a polite, professionally dressed woman knocking on his door, a small government ID badge clipped to her blazer. "Mr. Ethan Hayes?" she asked, her expression neutral. "My name is Maria Albright. I'm with the County Department of Family and Child Services." The ground fell away from Ethan's feet. A cold dread, far worse than anything he'd felt during the HOA ordeal, seized him. "We received an anonymous but detailed report expressing concern for your daughter's welfare," Ms. Albright explained, her voice gentle but firm. The report alleges she is being exposed to unsafe and potentially neglectful conditions related to an in-home, non-compliant medical apparatus. Non-compliant medical apparatus. The sanitized, bureaucratic language was designed to sound official, but Ethan knew exactly who had written it. Carol. It was her last. Most venomous arrow aimed not at his property, but at the very heart of his life, his fatherhood. He felt the familiar, hot surge of rage, but this time he contained it. He had learned. He looked at the social worker's tired but professional eyes and saw not an enemy, but a person doing a difficult job. "Please come in," he said, his voice shaking only slightly. "Let me show you everything. Let me tell you the whole story." For the next hour, Ethan calmly and methodically walked Ms. Albright through the last few months. He showed her the HOA letters, the legal filings, the news clippings, and Margaret's video. He explained Lily's condition and showed her the letters from the doctors at Johns Hopkins. Then, he took her to the backyard. He didn't just show her the pool. He showed her the details Sarah had insisted upon. The self-latching, self-closing gate that was impossible for a small child to open. The heavy-duty safety cover that could support the weight of 2 adults. The door alarms that chimed whenever the sliding glass door to the patio was opened. He showed her the built-in non-slip steps and the therapy jets Sarah had researched. It wasn't just a pool. It was a fortress of safety, built with a mother's foresight and love. Finally, with Ethan's permission, Ms. Albright sat down with Lily alone on the patio. Ethan waited inside, his hands trembling, his entire world hanging on the words of his 7-year-old daughter. He could see them through the glass. He saw Lily speak, her expression open and honest. He saw her point to the water and mime her swimming exercises. He saw her laugh. He saw Ms. Albright's professional mask soften into a warm, genuine smile. When she came back inside, her demeanor had changed completely. "Mr. Hayes," she said, closing her notebook, "I have everything I need. It is abundantly clear that you are a dedicated and loving father, providing exceptional care for your daughter. This facility is one of the safest and best-equipped private therapy pools I have ever seen." She paused, her gaze direct and filled with a weary sympathy. "It is also abundantly clear that the report filed with our office was not just unfounded, but knowingly and maliciously false. We have a legal and ethical obligation to protect children, but that also includes protecting families from this kind of targeted harassment. Filing a deliberately false report with CPS is a criminal offense, Mr. Hayes." A slow, dawning realization spread across Ethan's face. "Thank you," he said, the words thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing the truth." 2 days later, as Ethan was watering the rose bushes Sarah had planted, he saw a police car pull up, not to his house, not to Bill Johnson's, but to Carol Perkins's perfectly manicured beige colonial. 2 officers walked up her pristine walkway and knocked on her door. He watched as Carol opened it, her face a picture of confusion that slowly morphed into indignant fury as the officers began to speak. She tried to slam the door. One of the officers calmly blocked it with his foot. The system she had so expertly weaponized against others had finally, inexorably, turned on her. The law, which she had twisted and used as a cudgel to enforce her will, was now holding her to account. Months melted into a warm, glorious spring. A neighborhood-wide block party, the first in over a decade, filled the cul-de-sac with the sounds of laughter and music. The Lee's red swing set was a blur of motion. Mr. Henderson's flagpole stood proudly, its flag snapping in the breeze. The Patels had replanted their vegetable garden, and this time, their neighbors brought them seedlings to help it grow. Ethan sat in his usual spot by the edge of his pool. The last of the legal battles were over. The community was healing. A new board, led by a sensible and kind Margaret, was in place. But none of that was on his mind. He was watching Lily. She dove under the water. Her movements fluid and strong, and burst through the surface with a triumphant, joyful shout, spraying him with a shower of sparkling droplets. Her laughter, pure, free, and unburdened by pain, echoed in the golden afternoon light. He had fulfilled his promise. Sarah's last gift was safe. Her sanctuary was complete. And in fighting for it, he had found not just justice for himself, but a new beginning for everyone. The headlines and the brawl were a fading memory, but the sound of his daughter's laughter in the water was a victory that would last a lifetime.